how scapegoat survivors learn that closeness doesn't mean changing. Children need relationships where they can share their thoughts and feelings without fear that doing so will push others away. This teaches the child that they don't have to change when others draw close to them, that being visible and heard is a good thing. But this isn't so for the scapegoat child of a narcissistic parent. The starting point for closeness to their parent is based on that parent's needs, not the child's. The narcissistic parent alternatingly requires the child to show admiration and deference while the parent devalues, deprives, and domineers the child so that the child feels worthless. And they engage in these forms of abuse to unconsciously relocate the parent's own core sense of worthlessness into the scapegoat child. The point is that nothing about the scapegoat child's relationship to their narcissistic parent can include the child's honest expression of their true thoughts and feelings. The child learns that their parent's approach necessitates changing into someone else. The child learns that when their parent approaches them, they got to change into someone else. And that someone else will have to be whomever their parent needs them to be in that moment. At one time, it may mean being who is at fault for making the parent so frustrated and contemptuous. And at another time, it could mean having to applaud for the parent to quench that parent's thirst for admiration. Whatever the demand, it has nothing to do with how the child may honestly be feeling. In today's video, I describe how the scapegoat child learned that closeness meant changing. This basic lesson created a core loneliness for the scapegoat child. Saying what they truly think and feel would make their narcissistic parent withdraw, attack, or fall apart. So the child had to sequester these real thoughts and feelings into a private place in themselves that no one else could reach. But this can change for the adult scapegoat survivor, and I'll illustrate how it can over the course of therapy. With repeated new experiences in an ongoing relationship of the other person remaining intact and available when you express what you truly think and feel, you get to see that closeness no longer has to mean changing yourself. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in recovery from narcissistic abuse. In my personal and professional experience, I've worked to identify the fundamentals to the process of recovery, and this has led to what I call the 3 pillars of recovery. Pillar number 1 is making sense of what happened so that you know it wasn't your fault. Pillar number 2 is to gain distance from narcissistic abusers today and closeness to safe people. And pillar number 3 is to live in defiance of the narcissist rules. I think it's also essential to find and participate in communities of people who can get, validate, and support you on this path. I've both seen and experienced large improvements in quality of life after applying these pillars. And today's video falls under pillar number 3, living in defiance of the narcissist rules. If you were a scapegoat survivor of a narcissistic parent or partner, then I also encourage you to check out my free ebook on the topic. It's called Surviving Narcissistic Abuse as the Scapegoat, and it goes into other important aspects of what it's like to be in the shoes of the scapegoat child or partner, from self-limiting beliefs about yourself that you must adopt to survive, to why the narcissistic personality is so geared to put the people closest to them down. I think this ebook can help you realize how none of this abuse was your fault, but rather the product of a narcissistic person's psychological and emotional problems. And you can find the link to the book in the description box below or by clicking here. And lastly, if you find this content helpful, then I'd encourage you to subscribe to the channel. What closeness meant for the scapegoat child. Well, this child learned that they better prepare to be someone else when their parent would approach, or else. And this or else is the narcissistic parent's reactions to the child whenever the child would say what they truly think and feel, rather than what the parent wants to see and hear. This is especially the case when the child dares to express disapproval or anger towards their parent. In those cases, the child is usually met with one of the following: withdrawal. The narcissistic parent responds to the child's honesty with silence or detachment. They may ignore the child, stop engaging with them, or remove signs of affection. The child feels distanced from and concludes that sharing themselves risks being abandoned. Attack. At other times, the parent may react with hostility. The child is called selfish, dramatic, or disrespectful. The message is that their feelings are wrong or dangerous. And this teaches the child that speaking openly brings punishment. Collapse. The parent may also act as if the child's words are just too much to bear. They can act wounded or behave as if the child has caused serious harm. The child then feels responsible for the parent's emotional state and grows cautious about bringing up anything that might overwhelm the parent. Each of these responses reinforces the same lesson. Honesty is not allowed if you want to be close to someone else. Well, let's look at an anonymized case example to illustrate. John grew up with a father who was self-absorbed, thin-skinned, and prone to outbursts of rage. He was either too busy to show any interest in John, or he would mercilessly pay scrutinizing attention in attempts to highlight what was supposedly wrong with John. Amidst the alternating emotional desert, then emotional storms of his father, there was no room for John's honest expressions. And he learned this the hard way when he was 4 years old. John and his father were driving back from a soccer game that John had had to watch his father play in. While they were in the car, John blurted out that he thought his dad's games were boring to watch. "Nothing ever happens," he complained. John's frustration, though, quickly turned to terror as his father jerked the car over to the side of the road and stopped. And with a red face full of murderous rage, he looked at John and said, "Listen up, little boy. You can keep your opinions to yourself. Do you hear me?" John's eyes widened, and he immediately felt a searing shame for saying what he had said to his father. "Why am I so mean to my dad?" he wondered. He couldn't have known that the real question should have been, why was his father being so mean to him? Core loneliness in the scapegoat child. Well, the parent's reactions to the child's honest expressions create a dilemma for the child. Either keep others close by hiding what they really think and feel, or be honest and lose all needed connection. The only option that the scapegoat child has control over is the one that requires them to contort themselves to win connection from their parent. The other option would require the parent to change their abusive ways, and that's not something a narcissistic parent is able or willing to do. So the scapegoat child finds a way to make closeness to their parent on their parent's conditions suffice. But a wound gets inflicted on the child nonetheless, and that is the wound of loneliness. The child's real thoughts and feelings have no home in the world that they live in. Their narcissistic parent is just too emotionally disturbed for it to be otherwise. It's not like the child's thoughts and feelings go away, though. It's just that they get paired with the agony of being recoiled from that their parent so often visits upon them. On the one hand, it's good that the child's real thoughts and feelings don't go away because this affords the opportunity for healing later in life. But on the other hand, it's the continued existence of these thoughts and feelings that can remind the child of how fundamentally alone they are, even in what's supposed to be their closest relationship, the one to their parent. How the scapegoat child survives. Well, the child survives by forming, typically unconsciously, these three beliefs about themselves. When I say what I mean, people don't want to be around me. When I say what I mean, I make people hate me. And when I say what I mean, I hurt people. These beliefs put the scapegoat child in a state of high alert over what comes out of them. They become their own censor to spare themselves the withdrawal, attack, and/or collapse of their narcissistic parent that can happen if they say what they mean. Well, let's go back to John to illustrate a little further. His mother was even less involved in his life than his father. So his only choice was to try to be as close to his father as was possible. This meant showing up in ways that his father found acceptable. So John had to accept his father's hostility as deserved whenever his father was in a foul mood. And he had to work to make it in his father's self-interest to be around John. He also had to hold back everything but admiring statements towards his father. These ways of being were not honest captures of how he felt, but his father couldn't handle anything else. How therapy begins to change the definition of closeness. As critical as these beliefs were to survive childhood, they also offer a pathway to finding out that things no longer have to be this way for the adult scapegoat survivor. This is easily illustrated through the process of therapy with adult scapegoat survivors. So long as a survivor can find it in themselves to attend therapy, they afford themselves a chance to test and hopefully disconfirm the accuracy of these beliefs with their therapist. In fact, this is exactly how therapy works when it generates good outcomes. A type of therapy called control mastery theory has conducted multiple research studies that have looked at actual transcripts of therapy sessions and have found that when therapists respond in ways that help clients disconfirm these kinds of beliefs, clients get better. Scapegoat survivors who got through childhood by denying their honest thoughts and feelings when close to others often work in therapy to see if these same survival strategies are necessary with their therapist. The structure of therapy is designed to help clients disconfirm these three beliefs. Clients are encouraged to say whatever comes to mind in their sessions. And therapists are usually in the profession because they find meaning in being able to help others improve their quality of life. So if the client needs to express anger, disappointment, or frustration with the therapist to do that, then most therapists are all for it. And therapy sessions are usually led by the client so that they are not faced with demands to be one way or the other. It's about where they want to take the session. The process of therapy is also designed to help scapegoat survivors find it safe to be themselves in the presence of another. Most such survivors and therapists are aware that directly expressing dissatisfaction with another, no matter how true it feels, can be the hardest thing to do in life. As such, therapists are likely to notice, attune to, and work to demonstrate that expressing disapproval or disappointment in them is welcomed. But no matter how much a scapegoat survivor knows this in theory, it typically takes significant time in therapy before seeing what happens in actual practice. And this is because all therapy clients need time to sense and understand whether the therapist might in fact be safer to express themselves with than their parent was. As a survivor attends session time and again, they may get to the point where they do find it safe enough to see what happens if they directly express something less than satisfaction to their therapist. And when they do, instead of facing attack, withdrawal, or collapse, a scapegoat survivor usually finds curiosity from their therapist. In fact, some therapists may say something like, "It seems as if you're holding yourself back from being as critical of me as you may actually feel." This kind of response can be mind-blowing for a scapegoat survivor, but in the best way possible. Because the therapist is essentially saying that their only concern is that the survivor seems to be inhibiting themselves from fully expressing their anger or disappointment in the therapist. And implicitly, of course, this means that the therapist is not offended, angered, or hurt by the scapegoat survivor's honest expression. Each time this happens, the scapegoat survivor learns that they don't have to abandon themselves to preserve closeness, that they can remain connected while still expressing disapproval or difference. Over time, this shifts the very meaning of closeness. It no longer requires silence or self-editing. It begins to include honesty and authenticity. Also, when it grows to feel safe to be honest when you're close to others, those other people tend to feel more real to you, and you feel more real to yourself. And this is because honestly saying what you feel to another person and being understood just makes it feel more real. We don't have to hold the other person up in our own minds or imagination in order to keep them intact and preserve their goodwill towards us. They keep themselves intact and maintain their goodwill on their own accord. Experiencing this has to be discovered for scapegoat survivors since that was not their initial experience in life. But I don't think it can be overstated what a profound shift this can be. It lets in so much more freedom to be who you are when you only have to manage yourself and can trust the other to manage themselves. As the survivor internalizes these new experiences, the changes may begin to show up outside of therapy. You may start to share more of your thoughts with friends or partners. And you may test the waters by expressing frustration or disagreement. And when these relationships or friendships hold steady, you may gain even more confidence. But this expansion is necessarily gradual. Scapegoat survivors often find that some people in their lives can tolerate this honesty and others cannot. But the difference is that you now have a frame of reference, that you can see that the problem is not your honesty, but perhaps the limits of the relationship or friendship. This awareness can allow you to seek out people who are capable of staying connected, even when you're expressing something less than admiration. Well, let's look at how this played out for John. The rest of his childhood and adolescence could be summarized by finding a way to be close to people without telling them how he really felt. It was all that was tolerated at home, so he had to adopt the beliefs that doing otherwise was offensive, angering, and hurtful to others. This strategy let him get by in his life well enough. He could establish social connections that tended to be all about the other person, yet were certainly better than nothing. And he could tell himself to study and get good grades so that he didn't become a source of frustration for his father. John carried these strategies into college and got a degree in engineering. Upon graduating, he took a job in a different state. His life began to feel very different. There wasn't anyone else around to tell him what to do anymore. After work, he'd come home to his apartment and have all kinds of time to himself. Initially, this felt relieving. His time at work during the day would often feel like an internal pressure cooker, as though others were scrutinizing him to see if he was meeting their expectations. He worked really hard while feeling anxious the whole time. The relief from this stress in the evenings gradually gave way to a sense of emptiness. John wouldn't know how to fill up his time in ways that felt meaningful. He decided that he wanted more, but had no idea how to get it. So he did something that he'd never tried before: therapy. Upon first meeting with his therapist, who was named Greg, he felt how he always felt around people: tense. It was a tension that he felt at his core and was probably hard for others to detect, but he sure could. At the start of their first session, Greg said, "It's nice to meet you, John. The standing invitation for all of our sessions is to start wherever you think it makes sense, and I think that'll get us where we need to go." John had expected to be told a lot of stuff when he walked into Greg's office and was surprised by what Greg had offered. He got a little more anxious and said, I don't really know how this is supposed to work, or like what I'm supposed to talk about. Greg said, "Well, I think you just got off to a great start. What's it feel like when it seems like there are expectations upon you, but you don't know how to meet them?" And John said, "I mean, it sucks. Seems like it's just a matter of time until I'm told how I'm failing them." Greg said, "Yeah, that does sound like it sucks. It also sounds incredibly anxiety provoking." And John affirmed, "Yeah, it is." Greg didn't say anything next. He gave John room to go wherever he wanted to go. John felt a slight relaxation within as he saw how Greg wanted him to be able to say whatever was on his mind. Well, John stuck with therapy, and about a year into the process, the following happened in a session. Greg seemed less able than usual to track John in the session. He was asking John to repeat things that John had already said. John began to wonder if Greg was really listening to him or not. Usually, John would erase such a troubling thought from his awareness and just move on, act like nothing was happening. But his time with Greg had led John to feel a little safer in paying attention to experience that didn't conform to pure admiration of the other person. So John paid more attention to his feelings of offense that Greg seemed so distracted in their session. John didn't say anything about it in that session, but in the ensuing week, he encouraged himself in his private self-talk to bring it up. John was scared that Greg would deny what John had perceived in the last session. John was also concerned that Greg might decide he didn't want to work with John anymore because John wasn't appreciative enough of how hard Greg was working to help him. And John worried that Greg might act like he cared, but inside decide that he didn't like John anymore. But nonetheless, John went through with it anyway, and he said at their next session, "So Greg, last session, it seemed like you were distracted. I felt like I had to repeat myself several times, and I wanted to ask you what was going on." Well, Greg didn't materialize any of the outcomes that John had feared. Instead, he said, "Oh, yeah, I had this personal matter on my mind that day, and I had hoped that I had been able to handle it without it affecting my presence in our session, and apparently I didn't. But I'd like to hear more about what it was like for you." John went on to explain how he felt like he wasn't interesting enough to hold Greg's attention, and that this made him initially feel ashamed, but later angry. Greg said he really got what John was telling him, and he apologized for being so distracted. He told John that he would work to check in with himself before sessions more rigorously and try to make sure that he could be more present when they met. Well, John kept waiting for Greg to get mad and throw his complaint back at him, but it never happened. John would stay in therapy for years afterwards, and this session was the first brick in a long paved road of new experience for John, where he was learning in therapy to begin with Greg, that he didn't have to hide his disapproval to be in close relationship anymore. Well, if what I've described resonates with you, then I want to invite you to learn more about my Breaking the Scapegoat Spell online live group. And this group is for scapegoat survivors who grew up believing that closeness to others had to mean hiding yourself. Over 8 weeks, we focus on reversing that lesson. You'll learn concrete tools to interrupt the effects of narcissistic abuse that may still echo in your life today. These tools help you recognize when you're silencing yourself, identify the beliefs that keep you doing it, and practice new ways of responding. The group also includes structured partner work, and these partner exercises are designed to give you the lived experience of what today's video has described, being able to say what you really think and feel while still remaining in connection to another person. Many scapegoat survivors describe this as the missing piece in their recovery, that they finally get to feel what it's like to be heard without having to change themselves to earn connection. And you can learn more about the group in the link in the description box below or by clicking here. Well, I hope you found today's video helpful, and I want to thank everyone for your continued support of this channel and the resources that surround it. And as always, for your continued engagement in the comments section and sharing your own story and how the content may or may not relate to your experience, and also, again, to each other's experience, and showing validation and understanding, again, to combat that sense of loneliness that I think is so inherent in the experience of being the scapegoat. And with that, I look forward to posting again next Friday. Take care.